Hello friends, I'm Atul Dahale and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to look at one very brilliant game played by none other than Robert James Fischer, also known as Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer won the World Chess Championship in 1972, beating the almighty Russian Grandmaster Boris Spassky. And the game which we are going to look at was played between Rober Byrne as white and Bobby Fischer as black. It was played in USA Chess Championship 1963, and Bobby Fischer won this chess championship with the score of 11 out of 11, being ahead of the second player who was Larry Evans by 3.5 points. And the game which we are going to look at won the Brilliancy prize in that tournament. Yes, because Fischer demolished his opponent in just 21 moves. And a very funny incident happened at the end of the game is like Fischer's combination, that final combination was so brilliant and so complex that the two grandmasters which were commenting about the game in the commentary room were actually telling the audience that the final position was actually won for white, even though in that same position white player resigned. So it's very funny. So without further ado, let's try to understand why Fischer's opponent resigned on the 21st move. So the game started with d4. Black player Bobby Fischer played knight to the f6, then c4 was played, then g6 was played, then g3, then c6. Both players are fianchetto on their bishops. Fianchetto means developing the bishop on g7 and g2. Okay, white played bishop to the g2 and Fischer played d5. His idea is to block this bishop on this diagonal. So white played in a very simple manner. He played c into d5, black played c into d5, and he developed his knight to the c3 square. Always develop your pieces towards the center of the board. That is a good strategy in the opening. So black played bishop to the g7, developing the bishop and also preparing for the castle. So here a natural move would have been knight to the f3, developing the knight towards the center of the board. But white player decided to play e3 in this position. He is going to develop the knight to the e2 square. Okay. So after this, Fischer completed his development on the king side by playing castles. White played knight g e2, and here Fischer played knight to the c6, again developing the knight. And white completed his development on the king side with castles. And now in this position, if you take the stock of the position, we'll see that this bishop on c1, that's white bishop on c1, is little bit restricted by his own pawns. It cannot come out, right? Whereas black's bishop on c8 can come out on f5 square. But if he plays on f5, then white has a very simple and nice move that he can play f3, and the bishop on f5 will be feeling very uncomfortable after that, because white will be able to play g4 on the next move. Then he will play his knight to the g3, and the possible kingside attack can happen with h4 and h5. So this is something which Fischer did not want. So he decided to develop the bishop on another diagonal. And what will be the another diagonal? Yes, he can put the bishop on this a6 to f1 diagonal, which is the open diagonal. So that's why he plays b6. And as I told you, the bishop on c1 cannot go beyond this pawn. So he also decided to put the bishop on the same diagonal like Fischer. He plays b3. Then Fischer played bishop to the a6, putting the bishop on the only open diagonal which is useful. So white also played bishop to the a3. Now you can see that the position is almost symmetrical. The bishop on a3, then a6, knight on c3, knight on c6, d5, d4 pawn, and the structure on the king side is also. Everything is symmetrical in this position. And how will you play in such kind of positions which are so dull? But Fischer find out a brilliant way to open up the game. He's going to take the risk now. Let's see how he did it. He played rook to the e8, trying to play his pawn on e5 now. Okay. Now in this position, white played queen to the d2. But in his famous book, which he has written, that Fischer has written one very famous book like My 60 Memorable Games. In that book, he said like white should have played rook to the c1 in this position, which is actually a good move, because if you see the game which happened further, all the tactical combinations which happened were all best, because the queen was not well placed, and the rook on c1, it would have stopped all the combinations. So let's see what happened in the game. He played queen to the d2 in this position, and black, as per the plan, played e5. This is a little bit risky move because after d into e5, which was played, knight into e5, the pawn on d5 seems to be a little bit weak because the knight is attacking, the bishop on g2 is also attacking, and the queen on d2 is also attacking. So is Fischer going to lose the pawn? Maybe. Let's look at, if white plays knight into d5, then Fischer can play knight into d5, and in this position he cannot really capture the knight on d5, because if he captures with the bishop, then Fischer has a very nice trick. The queen on d2 is hanging, it is not having any support, so black can play knight to the f3 check, giving fork to the queen and the king. And if white's bishop can capture the knight, then he will lose the queen on d2. So that is not a good news for white. Let's suppose if he captures the queen, means the knight with the queen, then what is happening? The knight on e2 is hanging, and here in this position black can capture the knight with the bishop into e2 first, or maybe he can play queen into d5 first, then bishop into d5, and then bishop into e2, and after bishop into a8, rook into a8, this position is almost winning for black. So the d5 pawn cannot be captured safely. Okay, so he did not go for it. He played rook f d1, putting more pressure on the d5 pawn. But it is also said in the notes that white should have played rook a d1. Why? Because the rook on f1 is needed on that square, because it needs to be guarding the important f2 square. And also one more important thing is that the knight, when the rook will be on f1, it will be doing something other things also. We will reveal it after some time. Let's see what happens if rook a d1 was actually played. So here in this position the d5 pawn is being attacked, and black can maybe play queen to the c8, which is actually a good move. And here again we cannot really capture on d5 very safely, because after knight into d5 you cannot capture with the queen, and if you capture with the bishop, then black can play rook to the d8, and the bishop will be little bit awkwardly placed because it is pinned. And I think black is having a comfortable combination for the sacrificed pawn, so he did not go for that also. But this is the best that white can play, because he will not capture on d5, he will play something else. So in the game rook f d1 was played, and Fischer just decided to play in a simple manner. After this move we can see that the knight can jump to the d3 square, because it is being controlled by the bishop on a6, and that's what he did. The knight came on the 6th rank. What happens when the knight comes on 6th rank? It becomes a very monster kind of phase, because it will be attacking very important squares in opponent's camp. The knight on b2, the c1 square, e1 square, f2 square, all these squares are in the white's camp, and that knight becomes like an octopus, because it is controlling other squares also behind square, which will be like a defensive thing. And here in this position, to attack the knight on d3, his opponent played queen to the c2. Now his idea is to play rook into d3, bishop into d3, and queen into d3, winning 2 pieces for the rook. So here what should Fischer do? He cannot give any support to the knight by any other piece. So should he go back? But if he goes back, then his move on knight d3 will be wasted. So what to do in this position? But Fischer had a nice plan in his mind. He found out a brilliant combination at this position. He played a brilliant move, that is knight into f2. This is such a brilliant move because all the combination which happened in the game was based on this move. What it is doing, it is removing the defense of the e3 pawn. Yes, e3 pawn is not being defended by the pawn, and obviously here white might capture on f2. That's what he did. We will play knight to the g4. Fischer play knight g4. Now here we will see that the e3 pawn is being attacked by the knight as well as the rook. Okay, and in the game king g1 was played by his opponent. But let's check out other options also from white side. Let's suppose he plays knight king to the f1, then obviously it will be a big blunder, because knight into e3 will happen. Again the knight comes on the 6th rank with a big effect, because it will be capturing queen on c2, rook on d1, also giving a check, and also knight on bishop on g2 will be attacked. and it will be a family fork, and white will lose the queen, because if king g1 then knight into c2. So that is also not a good option for him. And if he tries to come up on the board by playing king to the f3, then white will be almost checkmated, because black will play rook into e3 check, giving the sacrifice of the knight. If he captures the knight, then we have a good move, that is, here we can play rook to the c8 check, and if suppose he plays king to the f4, then bishop h6 is a checkmate. And if he doesn't play like that, then obviously queen to the f5, even if he plays, he will lose the queen, so that is not a good idea. So because of this thing, he played king to the g1. So what will happen now? Yes, Fischer captured the knight with the pawn on e3 with the knight, and it is a family fork. It is attacking the queen, it is attacking the rook, it is also attacking the bishop, and his opponent played queen to the d2. Now what will you capture? Any normal player will capture the rook in this position, trying to recover the material. But no, Fischer was of not that opinion, because he understood the subtleties of the position in a deeper way. He understood that in this position, white's bishop on g2 is the main defender, and if he removes that defender, then white's king will be very weak, and he can create more attacking possibilities against white's king. That's why instead of capturing the rook on d1, he captured the bishop on g2, further weakening white's king. And after king into g2, in this position, we will see that the bishop on g7 is good, but the bishop on e2 means this a6 bishop is not doing that good. Maybe it can capture on e2, okay, the knight into e2 might happen, and black can capture the a1 rook and rook into a1, and the position will be slightly better for black, but it is not decisive advantage. But Fischer found out a brilliant way to convert his initiative. What he thought, if his bishop on a6 goes to this diagonal by bishop to the b7, then the bishop will be very dangerous for white's king. But if you just go there, then like if you just place bishop to the b7, then white can play knight d4 and block the pawn on d5. So what we need to do is first of all open up the diagonal. That's why Fischer played d4, a very nice move. He is giving up another pawn. Why? Just to open up the bishop's diagonal. And white accepted the challenge. He played knight into d4, and obviously what will Fischer play? Bishop to the b7, attacking the king on g2, and the bishop will be very strong on this diagonal. Now in this position, his opponent played king to the f1, and Fischer played queen to the d7, and to the surprise of everyone in the commentary room, in the tournament hall, white just resigned. And why? We will figure it out now. Because in this position, let's suppose first of all understand like what will happen if Fischer's opponent did not play king f1. He might have played king to the g1. Then we have a very nice thing. We can play bishop into d4 check, and after queen into d4, understand that the rook on d1 is the only piece which is supporting the queen, and black has a very nice move, that is rook to the e1 check. If rook into e1, then the queen will be captured, so that is not a good option for white. And after, let's suppose he plays somewhere king to the f2, then after queen into d4, rook into d4, rook into a1, black will be winning. So that is not a good option for white in this position. And if he plays king to the f2 in the position, then again queen to the d7 with the idea of bringing the queen to the h3 square is a very nice idea. The idea which happened in the similar fashion in the game is also there. So we'll see what happened after king f1, which was played in the game. Black player played queen d7 and suddenly he resigned. So here understand that the black's queen is coming on h3 square and giving a check, and the king will not be having too many squares. So let's suppose if white plays queen to the f2 in this position, then Fischer would have played queen h3 check, king to the g1. Now understand what is really happening. The queen is there on h3 square, bishop is on b7 square, bishop is g7 square, it is attacking the knight on d4. This rook is on e8 square. It can also come on any of the square if it's needed, And another important thing is that the g2 square is being guarded by only the queen on f2, and black is threatening queen to the g2 checkmate. So in this position, the queen on f2 is a very important piece for white. And from black side, if the queen is deflected from that square, if it's not there on the f2 square, then the Fischer will be able to give a checkmate on g2 square. So that is what was happening in the position. In this position, white can be checkmated with a very brilliant move. It starts with, the combination starts with rook to the e1 check. Yes, the queen is attacking, the rook is also attacking the rook on e1, but if he captures with the queen, then we will give a checkmate with queen to the g2. And if he captures with the rook, then the knight on d4 will lose the support of the d1 rook. And yes, what will you play? Bishop into d4. Now the queen is being pinned and queen g2 is the checkmate threatened. So maybe he will play rook to the e3, but we will not stop there. Fischer would have played bishop into e3, again attacking the queen. Now queen into e3 and queen g2 is a checkmate. So this whole combination, which started with knight f2, was so much brilliant, and the finish, which actually did not happen, was also very beautiful. The rook e1 sacrifice and then bishop into d4 was really brilliant. So I hope you understood why Fischer's opponent resigned on the 21st move now, and I hope you liked the video also. Do subscribe to my channel for more updates. Thank you for watching the video. Goodbye.